My name is Charles Hidalgo. I'll be with you for the next 2 hours reading to you today from the Fort Myers News Press and the Naples Daily News. We'll start things off with a look at today's weather, a headline scan from the front pages of today's newspapers, a look at world and national news, state and local news in the first hour. The second hour will cover obituaries, sports, business, news, and editorials. So pull up a drink, have a cup of coffee, stand by. We're going to be reading to you today, Wednesday, July 10th, 2019. The weather forecast for today: much of the northeastern corridor of the United States can expect more rain-free weather today. Patchy morning fog and low clouds will generally burn off to allow sunshine. A patch of clouds, showers, and thunderstorms will extend northward over parts of the central Appalachians and eastern part of the Ohio Valley. Drenching showers and thunderstorms will frequent the South United States. A budding tropical system in the northern Gulf of Mexico will enhance rain near the upper Gulf Coast as severe storms rumble farther north over the Mississippi Valley and the Midwest. Locally, in southwest Florida, today's weather will be typical for this time of year. We'll have scattered rain showers developing in the late afternoon with high temperatures between 87 and 90 degrees. From the front pages of today's USA Today, the headlines read, Pence to visit Texas border. Tour comes amid outcry over migrant centers. A USA Today network exclusive reads, Reduction in rangers puts parks at risk. Tightening budgets strips safeguards. Sex ring charges follow sinister pattern. Child traffickers prey on the most vulnerable. Magnet and Maverick Ross Perot dies at age 89. And the final headline from the USA Today is the best of the worst of Marvel villains, referring to the comic strip. From the front page of today's news press, the headlines read, Neogenomics to build new headquarters in South Lee. Cancer diagnostics company based in southwest Florida has seen significant growth. Coming Sunday, the Apollo moon landing 50 years later. And that's on the front page of today's news press. From the front page of today's Naples Daily News, school board to vote on Mason Classical's charter. Arthrex exec urges housing solution. Shortage affects workforce recruitment. And they are also going to be covering the Apollo moon landing 50 years later. Mexico tries funding to curtail migration. The story generated from the Associated Press out of Mexico City, Mexico. Mexico said Monday it will extend a reforestation program to Honduras and increase funding to $100 million to create jobs in Central America and stem migration from the region. Mexico had already announced the $30 million tree planting program for El Salvador, and that money presumably is part of the $100 million total effort. Marcelo Ebrard, Mexico's Foreign Relations Secretary, said Honduras' president is expected to finalize details in a visit to Mexico this month. Ebrard said creating jobs will do more than stop the flow of migrants than the border enforcement measures. It is unclear if Guatemala will also join Mexico's reforestation program. A similar plan to plant fruit and lumber trees is already being implemented in southern Mexico. It is one of the pet projects of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Ebrard said that the 327 Central American migrants awaiting U.S. asylum hearings have found jobs in northern Mexico, and that companies had offered a total of 3,700 positions. Under the Remain in Mexico program, 18,503 Central Americans who applied for asylum in the U.S. were returned to Mexico so far this year to await resolution of their U.S. cases. Critics claim the program, also known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, leaves migrants in Mexican border cities with no income or housing. Ebrard said Mexican officials had overcome legal hurdles to allow migrants to work while they are waiting. Many of the jobs are at border assembly plants known as maquiladoras. Ebrard said Mexico had also arranged with 16 border shelters to house at least some of the waiting migrants. Mexico's labor ministry announced to Juarez Initiative to find jobs and provide shelter and support services for waiting migrants in the border cities of Tijuana, Mexicali, Ciudad Juarez. The federal government would pay for the actions. Horacio Duarte Olivares, Deputy Secretary of Employment, said the migrants wouldn't be taking jobs from Mexicans, but rather filling openings. The government would fast-track their applications for work permits, he said. Also from the news press, this world story generating out of Washington, D.C., the headline reads as follows. Report. $15 minimum wage would help 27 million. The story by Lisa Mascaro of the Associated Press. Washington. Gradually raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour would boost pay for as many as 27 million workers, but it could also cost as many as 1.3 million jobs by 2025, according to a report released Monday from the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. That's the trade-off facing House Democrats as they prepare to vote on legislation to raise the wage, a top issue for lawmakers, and the party's 2020 presidential candidates confronting an era of stagnant pay and gaping income inequality. The Democratic chairman of the Education and Labor Committee, Representative Bobby Scott of Virginia, said the report makes the case for increasing the wage, which would be the first in a decade. The benefits vastly outweigh costs, Scott said. Anybody who reads the whole report will be impressed by the 27 million people having significant benefits. The Budget Office found that some 17 million workers now earn less than $15 would see their wages boosted, and another 10 million already at that pay level could also benefit. The result would also bring some 1.3 million workers, half of them children, out of poverty, it said. At the same time, boosting the federal minimum wage could result in job losses. That has long been the argument against wage hikes, particularly from Republicans in Congress and their allies in the business community. The Budget Office's report acknowledges considerable uncertainty around the issue. It expects 1.3 million workers would lose their jobs, but also says there's a chance there could be as many as 3.7 million, or the outcome could be no job losses at all. Douglas Holtz Eakin, a conservative-leaning former director of the Budget Office, said on Twitter, results not shocking. Lose 1.3 million jobs, median. He said those advocating for legislation to raise the wage are really missing the point about helping genuinely poor people. Now, at $7.25 an hour, the federal minimum wage has not been raised since 2009, when Democrats last controlled the House, though 29 states and several cities have set their minimum wages above that level. Here's some news from the north on page 2A of the Fort Myers News Press. Arizona. Before the moon landing, astronauts learned geology in northern Arizona. This story was written by Felicia Fonseca of the Associated Press and generates out of Flagstaff, Arizona. Before Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin knew they would be the first to walk on the moon, they took a crash course in geology at the Grand Canyon and a nearby impact crater that is the most well-preserved on Earth. Northern Arizona has had deep ties to the Apollo missions. Every moonwalking astronaut trained here, and a crater on the moon was even named in honor of the city of Flagstaff. It's a really interesting and unique part of the history, and it's really cool to think that this relatively small town in northern Arizona played such a big role in the Apollo missions, said Benjamin Carver, a public lands historian at the Northern Arizona University. Today, astronaut candidates still train in and around Flagstaff, which is among many cities celebrating the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing on July 20th, 1969. They walk in the same volcanic cinder fields where the U.S. Geological Survey intentionally blasted hundreds of craters from the ground to replicate the lunar surface, testing rovers and geology tools. In another historical photo, Apollo astronaut Jim Irwin and David Scott ride around in Grover, a prototype of the lunar rover made in Flagstaff from space parts, and now on display at the Astrogeology Center. The eventual lunar rover used in the 3 Apollo missions famously got broken in the fender on a 1972 mission to the moon. Astronauts cobbled together a quick fix that included a map produced by a geologist in Flagstaff. Flagstaff is celebrating the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing with tours, exhibits, talks, and a moon-themed food and art festival. Charlie Duke, the youngest astronaut on the moon, is returning to Flagstaff in September as a keynote speaker at the annual Science Festival. He and Jason Young, who were on Apollo 17, named a Moon Center flag crater. And there's a photograph accompanying the story and shows a fenced-off field of craters in a volcanic cinder field east of Flagstaff, Arizona, and it was used as a training site for astronauts who landed on the moon. Here's a story in brief. The headline reads, "Baby is born from donor's transplanted womb." The Cleveland Clinic said it delivered the first baby in North America after a womb transplant from a dead donor. Uterine transplants enabled more than a dozen women to give birth, usually with wombs donated from a living donor such as a friend or relative. In December, doctors in Brazil reported the world's first birth using a deceased donor's womb. These transplants were pioneered by a Swedish doctor who did the first successful one 5 years ago. The Cleveland Hospital said Tuesday that the girl was born in June. The clinic has done 5 uterus transplants so far, and 3 have been successful, with 2 women waiting to attempt pregnancy with new wombs. Clinics aim to enroll 10 women in its study. Hoverboard fire lawsuit can move forward. A Tennessee's family's lawsuit against online retailer Amazon over a hoverboard fire that destroyed their home can move forward. The 6th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in a Friday ruling said Amazon was aware of complaints about hoverboards catching fire and exploding. The Seattle-based company even launched an investigation that led to it ceasing all hoverboard sales worldwide. But Amazon's notice to consumers consisted of an email saying that there had been reports of safety issues. Megan and Charles Fox say their son had left his hoverboard downstairs in their home when it caught fire in January 2016. The fire trapped 2 of the children upstairs, and they had to jump from second-floor windows to escape. Their home was destroyed along with all of their possessions. Steamship site becomes marine sanctuary. An area in Maryland that's home to abandoned World War I-era steamships was designated a new National Marine Sanctuary. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the state of Maryland and Charles County, announced the Mallows Bay Potomac River National Marine Sanctuary on Monday. It contains more than 100 abandoned steamships and vessels that were built as part of the nation's engagement in World War I. It's about 40 miles south of Washington, D.C., and it will be the first National Marine Sanctuary designated since 2000. And let's take a look at some more national news from the USA Today's newspaper. Here's a front page story. Pence to visit Texas border. Tours come amid outcry over migrant centers. The story by Maureen Grope of the USA Today. Washington. Vice President Mike Pence will travel to the southern border Friday, the same day House Democrats will hold a hearing on dangerous conditions at overcrowded migrant detention centers. Pence tweeted Monday that he will go to McAllen, Texas, home to one of the federal detention centers contributing to what federal investigators called, quote, a ticking time bomb. Pence said he will be accompanied by his wife and a bipartisan delegation of members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. An Inspector General's report released last week described the conditions at the detention facilities in Rio Grande Valley. Border Patrol managers told investigators men had clogged toilets with Mylar blankets or socks to get out of cells during maintenance. Pictures in the report showed migrants crowded behind chain-link fences in a McAllen facility and huddling under blankets on the floor. Detainees banged on windows, shouted, and pointed to their beards to demonstrate the length of their stays as investigators from the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General's office visited 5 facilities during the week of June 10th. As he announced his McAllen trip, Pence welcomed passage of an emergency aid bill for the border, but said on Twitter that much more must be done to secure our border and end this crisis. In a speech Monday morning to Christians United for Israel, Pence blamed Democratic obstruction for problems at the border. Pence accused Democrats of initially denying there was a crisis and said they held up funding to ease the situation. He accused them of refusing to close the loopholes used by human traffickers to exploit those vulnerable families. He says, "We will provide compassionate relief to vulnerable families swept up in the crisis, and we will fix the broken immigration system once and for all." Representative Elijah Cummings, Democrat from Maryland, chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, accused the administration of open contempt for the rule of law and for basic human decency in its treatment of migrants. The committee asked Kevin McAleenan, acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and Mark Morgan, acting commissioner of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, to testify before the panel Friday. The conditions arose as apprehensions in the Rio Grande Valley more than doubled in the past year, 223,263 from October through May, compared with 99,835 for the same period a year earlier, according to the Border Patrol. The largest increase occurred among families, skyrocketing to 1,335,812 apprehensions during the first 8 months of the year, from 36,773 a year earlier. Border protection facilities are designed for shorter stays before adults are passed along to Immigration and Customs Enforcement and children move to Health and Human Services facilities. Because ICE and HHS facilities are also overcrowded, the Border Protection Agency is unable to transfer its detainees. Firebrand brought swagger to politics. The headline reads, in memory of H. Ross Perot, born 1930, deceased 2019. The story by David Koenig of the Associated Press out of Dallas, Texas. H. Ross Perot, the colorful, self-made Texas billionaire who rose from childhood, an era of depression, poverty. He twice ran for president as third-party candidate and died yesterday at the age of 89. Perot, whose 19% of the vote in 1992 stands among the best showings by an independent candidate in the past century, died early Tuesday at his home in Dallas, surrounded by his family, spokesman James Fuller said. As a boy in Texarkana, Texas, Perot delivered newspapers from the back of a pony. He earned his billions in a more modern way, however, by building Electronic Data Systems Corporation, which helped other companies manage their computer networks. Yet, the most famous event in his career didn't involve sales and earnings. He financed a private commando raid in 1979 to free 2 EDS employees who were being held in a prison in Iran. The tale was turned into a book and a movie. Perot became the first known to Americans outside business circles by claiming that the U.S. government left behind hundreds of American soldiers who were missing or imprisoned at the end of the Vietnam War. Perot fanned the debate at home and discussed it privately with Vietnamese officials in the 1980s, angering the Reagan administration, which was formally negotiating with Vietnam's government. Perot's wealth, fame, and confident prescription for the nation's economic ills propelled his 1992 campaign against President George H.W. Bush and Democratic challenger Bill Clinton. Some Republicans blamed him for Bush's loss to Clinton, as Perot garnered the largest percentage of votes for a third-party candidate since former President Theodore Roosevelt's 1912 bid. Perot spent $63.5 million of his own money in the campaign and bought up 30-minute television spots. He used charts and graphs to make his points, summarizing them with a line that became a national catchphrase. It's just that simple. Perot's second campaign, 4 years later, was far less successful. He was shut out of presidential debates when organizers said he lacked sufficient support. He got just 8% of the vote, and the Reform Party he founded and hoped to build into a national political force began to fall apart. But Perot's ideas on trade and deficit reduction remained part of the national landscape. He blamed both major parties for running up a huge federal budget deficit and letting American jobs be sent to other countries. The movement of U.S. jobs to Mexico, he said, created a giant sucking sound. Perot continued to speak out about federal funding for many years. In 2008, he launched a website to highlight the nation's debt with a ticker that tracked the rising total, and a blog and a chart presentation. Henry Ross Perot was born in Texarkana on June 27, 1930. His father was a cotton broker. His mother was a secretary. Perot said his family survived the Depression relatively well through hard work and by managing their money carefully. Young Perot's first job was delivering newspapers in a poor, mostly black part of the town. He said that when the newspaper tried to cut his commission, he complained to the publisher and won. He said he learned to take problems straight to the top. From Texarkana, Perot went to the U.S. Naval Academy. After the Navy, Perot joined the International Business Machines Company, IBM, in 1955 and quickly became a top salesman. In his last year at IBM, he filled his quota for the year in January. In 1962, with $1,000 from his wife, Margot, Perot founded Electronic Data Systems. Hardware accounted for about 80% of the computer business, Perot said, and IBM wasn't interested in the other 20%, including services. Many of the early hires at EDS were former military men, and they had to abide by Perot's strict dress code. White shirts, ties, no beards or mustaches, and long days. Many had crew cuts like Perot. In later years, Perot pushed the Veterans Affairs Department to study neurological causes of Gulf War syndrome, a mysterious illness reported by many soldiers who served in the 1991 Persian Gulf War. He scoffed at officials who blamed the illnesses on stress, as if they are wimps, and paid for additional research. Perot received a special award from the VA for his support of veterans and the military in 2009. And that is a full reading of Firebrand Brought Swagger to Politics, the passing of H. Ross Perot. In other news around the country, wealthy activist joins 2020 race. The story by Nicholas Wu, USA Today, Washington. Tuesday morning, billionaire and activist Tom Steyer became the most recent Democrat to join the race for president. In a video posted on YouTube, Steyer argues that his campaign aims to get money out of politics and address the impact of climate change. Almost every major single intractable problem at the back of it, you see a big money interest for whom stopping justice is really important to their bottom line, he said. Acknowledging his wealth, which Forbes estimates at $1.6 billion, Steyer says in the video that he signaled to giving a pledge a promise to give away half of your wealth while you're alive to good causes. Corporate money has corrupted our democracy and stripped Americans of our ability to determine our own future, Steyer said in a news release. The only way for us to solve the urgent problems facing our country is to loosen the stranglehold that corporations have over our politicians and return political power to the American people. Steyer gained national prominence at the helm of the liberal advocacy groups such as Need to Impeach, which organizes grassroots efforts to impeach President Donald Trump and claims to have an email list of more than 8.2 million Americans. He leads Next Gen America, a climate-oriented advocacy group. In January, he said he would not join the presidential race, saying he would instead be strengthening my commitment to Need to Impeach. Republican National Committee spokesman Steve Guest said Steyer would just light more of his money on fire. After a false start, left-wing extremist Tom Steyer has finally formalized his self-promotion tour under the guise of a presidential campaign, Guest said. The only thing Steyer's campaign will do is light more of his money on fire as he joins the rest of the 2020 Democratic field in pushing policies that are way outside the mainstream. Steyer is one of 24 Democrats in the race, and he enters the race late after the first Democratic presidential debate. The next Democratic presidential debate will be July 30th and July 31st in Detroit. Monday afternoon, Representative Eric Swalwell, a Democrat of California, dropped out of the presidential race, saying he would instead run for re-election to the House of Representatives. And that's a full reading of the story. Wealthy activist joins 2020 race. The next headline reads, Democrat challenging McConnell. The story written by Philip M. Bailey, Joseph Girth, and Lucas Albach of the Louisville Courier-Journal, a USA Today network. Kentucky Democrat Amy McGrath is suiting up to enter the 2020 U.S. Senate race against Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. The former fighter pilot ended months of speculation over whether she would make a run, announcing her bid with a video posted to YouTube early Tuesday ahead of an appearance on MSNBC's Morning Joe. In the video, McGrath said she wrote to McConnell when she was 13, telling him she wanted to fly combat jets and fight for the U.S. when she was an adult. He never wrote back, she says in the video. I'm Amy McGrath. I've often wondered how many other people did Mitch McConnell never take the time to write back or even think about. McGrath's name has been bounced around as a possible contender for the Democratic nomination since her failed 2018 attempt to knock off Representative Andy Barr in Kentucky's 6th Congressional District. Rumors continued to take shape when it was reported earlier this year that Senate Democratic leader Charles Schumer of New York, McConnell's counterpart and chief adversary, was encouraging McGrath to run. McGrath, a mother of 3 from Georgetown, Kentucky, has since been spotted at events across the state and has regularly slammed McConnell on social media. Tuesday morning on MSNBC, she said Kentucky is ready for a change in the nation's capital. I think this is a message that Kentuckians are ready for, she said. McGrath, who was painted as too liberal by Republicans last year, described herself as a moderate. She also tried to put distance between herself and Democrats running for president. For instance, she said that she does not favor taking away private insurance as part of a federal overhaul and opposes subsidizing insurance for undocumented migrants, which some presidential candidates have backed. I think many Kentuckians feel that we have a problem with getting health insurance for many Americans, so we need to fix that first, McGrath said on MSNBC. The McConnell campaign did not immediately respond to a request for comment about McGrath's announcement, but his campaign sent a tweet welcoming McGrath to the race and featuring her comments in support of abortion and criticizing the Trump administration's plan to build a wall at the southern border. McGrath has never held office, but she said in Tuesday's TV interview that shouldn't be held against her. I'm not doing this because, like I said, I want to become a politician. She said, I'm doing this because I care about my country. I care about Kentucky. And that is a full reading of the story, Democrat Challenges McConnell. Our next headline reads, Court rules Trump can't block people on Twitter. The story by Nicholas Wu of the USA Today. Washington. Tuesday, a federal appeals court ruled that President Donald Trump can't block people on Twitter, citing unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination. The judges in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled unanimously in the case. Knight First Amendment Institute v. Trump upholding a district court judge's ruling. Judge Barrington Parker, who was appointed by President George Bush, wrote in affirmation of the district court's ruling. Because we agree that in blocking the individual plaintiffs, the president engaged in prohibited viewpoint discrimination, we affirm, Parker wrote. Parker explained that the court did not take a stance on banning users from a private account or whether the First Amendment governs speech on social media platforms. We do conclude, however, that the First Amendment does not permit a public official who utilizes a social media account for all manner of official purposes to exclude persons from a otherwise open online dialogue because they express views with which the official disagrees, Parker wrote. The public presentation of the account and the web page associated with it bears all the trappings of an official state-run account, Parker said, meaning that the First Amendment governed the conduct of the account. The Trump administration's lawyers had argued Trump's tweets were made in his personal capacity rather than from an official government account, so blocking other Twitter users would be permissible, an argument the court rejected. Trump's Twitter account has about 61.8 million followers. The contributing journalist to this story was John Fritz. The story, Court Rules Trump Can't Block People on Twitter. Dispense more birth control, study urges. Experts, year supply gives women options. Elizabeth Lawrence, USA Today. Distributing a year's supply of birth control pills to women up front reduces unintended pregnancies, according to a new research from the University of Pittsburgh and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. In addition to supporting reproductive autonomy, the study shows the policy is economically feasible. Lead author Dr. Colleen Judge Golden said her team weighed the cost of giving patients more oral contraceptive pills at a time against pregnancy health care cost. There's a clear winner, she said, providing more birth control pills. We found that the concern over potential wastage is overshadowed by the health care costs that are associated with pregnancy, Judge Golden said. Right now, there's no national standard for dispensing periods of oral contraceptives. 70% of women receive a supply of 3 months or fewer, and 15% receive a supply of more than 6 months, according to the Henry J. Kaiser Foundation. 17 states and the District of Columbia have passed laws requiring insurers to cover 12 months of birth control pills. But the reality is that even in those states, it's difficult for people to get a year's coverage up front. According to Sally Raffi, a pharmacist specialist and founder of Birth Control Pharmacists. The way the laws are written is that it requires the insurance companies to pay for a full year's supply at once if the patient requests it, Raffi said. The insurance companies are often not covering a full year's supply. The accountability and monitoring of compliance with mandates like that is the problem. Some insurance companies are reluctant to offer 12 months of contraceptives at a time, says Catherine Donaldson, Communications Director for American Health Insurance Plans. One reason for concern, Donaldson said, is that using any medication in the long term comes with risks. Side effects and improper use of prescription drugs can have a serious and potentially life-threatening impact on patients, which is why it is recommended patients regularly consult their physician, pharmacist, or other care provider, Donaldson wrote to USA Today. She said 12-month supplies could prompt, quote, waste, fraud, abuse, and increased costs. Instead, patients can have refills of oral contraceptives delivered to them before their supply is out, Donaldson said. It's important to remember that before the 90-day supply is exhausted, a refill can seamlessly be delivered to the home of the individual, encouraging adherence while easing the need to travel to a pharmacy or other location, she said. Typically, prescriptions are written for a full year, but most insurance plans, including the VA, have a 90-day dispensing limit. And that is a full reading of the story, Dispense More Birth Control, Study Urges. Weeks after rampage, VA rejects gun limits. And the subheadline reads, GOP ends special session without voting on bill. The story written by John Bacon from the USA Today. Virginian Republicans slammed the door on a wide range of gun control measures Tuesday, adjourning a one-day special legislative session called by Democratic Governor Ralph Northam less than 6 weeks after a gunman's rampage in Virginia Beach left 12 dead. Gun control supporters had hoped the special sessions would energize their efforts nationwide to turn the tide against the corrosive influence of the gun lobby. Chris Brown, president of the Washington-based Brady Gun Control Group, described the state's GOP leadership as, quote, nothing short of cowards who could have set an example for the nation. If these leaders won't enact solutions that their own constituents are demanding, then we're going to fight tooth and nail to represent who will, Brown said. Northam and other Democratic leaders in the state hoped the outrage sparked by the carnage in Virginia Beach would propel their plan through the legislature. Let's turn our pain into purpose. Let's come together to pass common-sense gun safety laws, Northam tweeted hours before the legislative session began. Supporters of the measure rallied Tuesday at the Capitol in Richmond as Northam led them in a vigorous chant of enough is enough. Nearby, gun rights supporters held their own demonstration. After some early drama, the GOP-controlled legislature rejected all the proposals without a vote. The session heated up when the Republican Senator Bill Stanley resigned as majority whip of his party's caucus, citing a bill proposed by Senate Majority Leader Tommy Normant that would ban guns from most government buildings. Normant's wife lobbies for the city of Virginia Beach. Normant withdrew his bill, and Stanley was voted back into the position as his party attempted to shore up its position of unity. A split in the Republican position would have aided Northam, whose biggest obstacle was numbers. Republicans hold narrow majorities in the House and Senate. The gun issue comes at a politically sensitive time in Virginia, where all 140 seats are up for election in November. Democrats and the gun control lobby say GOP rejection of meaningful gun control legislation could catapult Democrats to control of both legislative bodies. The Republican majorities carried the day. Carl Tobias, a law professor at the University of Richmond, said Republicans have routinely killed similar measures. He said it was impossible to say what impact Tuesday's session would have here in November. Depending on how voters feel about the quality of the candidates who are running in November, he told USA Today. How the two parties address the issues that voters care about and how successful the parties are turning out voters. From the front page of the USA Today, sex ring charges follow sinister pattern. The subheadline reads, Child traffickers prey on the most vulnerable. The story by Aliyah E. Dastager of the USA Today. Jeffrey Epstein, the wealthy financier convicted 11 years ago of soliciting minors for prostitution, now stands accused of preying on children in a manner that is disturbingly familiar to sex trafficking experts, targeting society's most vulnerable young people. A federal indictment, unsealed Monday, charges that Epstein sexually exploited and abused dozens of minor girls, some as young as 14, at his home in Manhattan and Palm Beach, Florida, and other locations. The indictment describes the victims as particularly vulnerable to exploitation. Epstein has pleaded not guilty. Private investigator Mike Fisten, who has been working for more than a decade with attorney Brad Edwards, who represents 14 of Epstein's accusers, said the victims have much in common. Quote, as far as I've been able to find from my investigation, vulnerable children and girls are all he targets. The more vulnerable and the younger, the better, Fisten said. The charges, 1 count of sex trafficking and 1 of sex trafficking conspiracy, stem from accusations dating to 2002 through 2005. The only way his scheme works is to recruit the most vulnerable girls, Edwards said. First of all, that age group he targets, 13 to 17, is particularly vulnerable, and he knows that. And then the most susceptible of falling into his trap are the ones that have a parent in the household or a good support system and who need money. Quote, $200 to $300 to $400 to any 13-year-old in America is a lot of money. And you dangle it to those who've never seen that much money in one place at one time, and he realized that you can get someone to do almost anything. Now he's created a very solid spiderweb of girls whose vulnerabilities he can prey on. He preyed upon children who were already vulnerable, said Martina Vandenberg, a founder and president of the Human Trafficking Legal Center, about the latest allegations involving Epstein. He preyed upon children in the foster care system. He preyed upon children already being abused. Perpetrators of sex trafficking often target victims who are poor, lack support networks, and are living on the margins of society, experts say. They especially target children with a history of abuse and neglect, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Research shows that 1 in 7 endangered runaways were likely sex trafficking victims, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Research also shows 85% of girls involved in the commercial sexual exploitation of children were previously involved in the child welfare system, according to the Department of Justice reports in 2014. A 2016 study on risk factors for child sex trafficking in the U.S. found participants who identified as a racial or ethnic minority were more than twice as likely to have been trafficked as a child than white participants. LGBTQ youth are at particular risk for sex trafficking. Up to 40% of homeless young people identify as LGBTQ. They are 3 to 7 times more likely to engage in survival sex to meet basic needs such as shelter and food. Bias and discrimination end up equaling secrecy and alienation. And when you don't have support systems, that often creates risk factors that people who inflict harm on others are seeking out, said Christian Hauser, Chief Public Affairs Officer at the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Many of the children have experienced trauma before. They have been taught to believe that their bodies are not their own, that they have no voice, experts say. Quote, "After years in foster care, I didn't think anyone would want to take care of me unless they were paid. So when my pimp expected me to make money to support the, quote, family, it made sense to me," one survivor said in a 2018 report by ECPAT, a group aimed at ending child prostitution and trafficking. Experts say immigrants are often told from the time they get into the United States that law enforcement is corrupt, and traffickers reinforce that notion by saying they are bribing police. There are hundreds of thousands of human trafficking victims in the United States, estimates Polaris, a nonprofit that operates the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Experts say traffickers and pimps target places where emotionally vulnerable girls can be found, such as group homes, shelters, and rehab programs. Experts say the industry has also grown because perpetrators have gained more access to victims through the internet. Traffickers are very good at spotting these potential victims through social media, said Donna Hughes, a leading international researcher on human trafficking. They give the girls the things they are longing for: someone to talk to who will listen to them at length. Someone will take their side when they describe conflicts with family, friends, or school. They give them gifts, things the girls could never afford. They take them to places they've never been before. And that is a full reading of the story Sex Ring Charges Follow Sinister Pattern. There's a time and place to lick ice cream. The story from the Shreveport Times, a USA Today network, out of Shreveport, Louisiana. The sheriff's office in Assumption Parish said a man posted a video of himself on Facebook opening a Blue Bell ice cream container at a store, licking it, poking it with his finger, and putting it back on the shelf. Lenice Martin, 36, charged Saturday with property tampering and posting criminal activity for notoriety and publicity. Police Commander Lonnie Cavalier said that after being alerted by the store's management, deputies found Martin at the scene showing a sales clerk a receipt to prove he had purchased the ice cream he licked. Deputies searched the freezer and confirmed the purchase, but still decided to move forward with the charges. Cavalier told CNN that authorities believe Martin was inspired by a video taken this month of a teen in Texas taking ice cream from a Walmart freezer, removing the top to lick it, then putting it back. "We believe it's a copycat incident," Cavalier told the network. He did want to create some notoriety for himself by posting it on Facebook. The contributing author of this story was Ndia Yancey Bragg of the USA Today. The story, "There's a time and place to lick ice cream." Here's a headline. Report 20% of hospices had serious deficiency, by Ndia Yancey Bragg and Morgan Hines of the USA Today. The majority of hospices in the United States have at least one problem with their care, and about 20% have at least one serious deficiency, according to the government watchdog investigation. More than 80% of the 4,563 hospice centers that provide care to Medicare beneficiaries, surveyed nationwide from 2012 to 2016, had at least one deficiency, according to a report this month from the Department of Health and Human Services Offices of Inspector General. For the roughly 20% of hospice centers that had at least one serious deficiency, the report says their capacity to furnish adequate care was substantially limited, or the health and safety of beneficiaries were in jeopardy. Among the most common non-serious deficiencies uncovered, poor care planning, mismanagement of aid services, and inadequate assessments of beneficiaries, the department said in a news release. These failings, such as improperly vetting staff and inadequate quality control, can jeopardize beneficiaries' safety and lead to poor care. The report noted problems such as the lack of supervision and proper training for staff and failures to obtain criminal background checks, to monitor medication, to treat severe wounds properly, to stop patients from falling down, and to track infections. The number of serious deficiencies nearly quadrupled from 2012 to 2015, then slightly declined the following year. At one hospice center mentioned in the report, a nurse didn't tell a physician about a patient's escalating pain or increasing use of pain medication. The patient was taking double the prescribed doses of fentanyl, a highly addictive drug. A secondary report was released. Some beneficiaries have been seriously harmed when hospices provided poor care or failed to take action in cases of abuse, the secondary report said. The Office of the Inspector General suggested that safeguards for patients must be strengthened. The report recommends the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services seek authority to establish intermediate solutions for poor hospice performance. We're going to move on to a couple of local stories. Arthrex shortage of affordable workforce housing affecting hiring. A story by Laura Layden of the Naples Daily News of the USA Today Network. Arthrex is a company located in Naples, Florida. When it comes to providing affordable housing for workers, the status quo isn't working in Collier County. That's the message David Bumpus, a top executive for Arthrex, one of the country's largest employers, delivered to a county commissioner Tuesday. Bumpus, Arthrex's senior director of operations, made a brief presentation about the medical device manufacturer's growth. But it wasn't all positive news. He touched on the difficulty of the company and that it continues to face in trying to recruit workers to fill its growing number of jobs. It's a difficulty that it blames, in large part, on a shortage of affordable housing. We just can't maintain the status quo, Bumpus said. If the county does maintain the status quo, he said, Arthrex may be forced to take more of its operations out of town. The company is expanding in South Carolina, partly due to limits on its growth in Collier County, which includes not having affordable homes for workers near its expanding North Naples headquarters. Arthrex recently added 300,000 square feet of manufacturing and support space in South Carolina. In late 2017, the company announced plans to build a $74 million manufacturing plant that will create 1,000 jobs over 5 years in Anderson County, where skilled workers are more plentiful. Within 7 days of getting the certificate of occupancy for the first phase of its project, Arthrex was manufacturing parts in South Carolina, Bumpus said. While Collier County has supported Arthrex's growth when it comes to growing its physical footprint, Bumpus said more needs to be done to encourage the lower cost of housing. And that's a partial reading of the story. Arthrex shortage of affordable workforce housing affecting hiring. Here's a headline on a local story. Death of North Fort Myers girl under review by state attorney. The story by Michael Braun, Fort Myers News Press, USA Today Network, Florida. The state attorney of the 20th Judicial Circuit is reviewing the case of Alana Tamplin, the 12-year-old girl who was killed while walking along the Durrance Road in North Fort Myers in January. The FHP conducted the traffic homicide investigation and said the report detailing its findings will be made available upon its completion. The review is being done at the request of the Florida Highway Patrol. Spokesman Lieutenant Greg Bueno confirmed Monday. The Oak Hammock Middle School 7th grader was walking home the morning of January 14th with her best friend after taking her sister to her bus stop. She was near her home when Miller, driving a 2006 Toyota, allegedly hit her and knocked her into a ditch. The driver in the crash, Mary Ann Miller, 64, was issued a citation for driving carelessly involving a death, which carries a mandatory court date. Here's a short little story from Tallahassee, Florida. Groups sue Florida over early voting on college campuses. Voting rights advocates filed suit against the Florida Secretary of State over a new law they say makes it impossible to hold early voting on college campuses. They argue that the law disenfranchises young voters. The measure requires early voting locations to have sufficient non-permitted parking, which critics say would virtually ban sites on college campuses because of their restrictive parking rules. It was part of a broader voting bill signed into law last month by Governor Ron DeSantis. The lawsuit against Secretary of State Laurel M. Lee was filed Monday in the U.S. District Court in Tallahassee. Lee did not have a direct hand in drafting the law, but would have to enforce it. The plaintiffs include the League of Women's Voters and the 8 Young Voters. Florida deputy found guilty in excess of force case out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. A Florida deputy was convicted in an excessive force case. The Sun-Sentinel reports that Broward Sheriff's Deputy Justin Lambert, age 38, was found guilty Tuesday of battery and falsifying records. He faces up to 6 years in prison at his August 29th sentencing. Prosecutors say Lambert and several other deputies responded to a Deerfield Beach convenience store in February 2014 following reports of someone trying to steal beer. Prosecutors say Lambert punched the man, aged 51, and took him to the ground, leaving him with a black eye and multiple facial fractures. Defense attorneys argued that Lambert used the level of force he was trained to use. FHP, Lehigh Acres man drove through stop sign, suffered critical injuries. The story by Michael Braun of the Fort Myers News Press, a USA Today network in Florida. A Lehigh Acres man is in critical condition at Lee Memorial Hospital after a two-vehicle crash Monday afternoon. The Florida Highway Patrol said Yancel Rodriguez Medina was driving a 2013 Dodge Charger eastbound on East 9th Street approaching Richmond Avenue North. Charles Davis, 52 of Fort Myers, was driving a 2012 Chevy Silverado southbound on Richmond approaching 9th. An FHP report said Rodriguez Medina failed to stop at the stop sign and the front of Davis's truck hit the left side of the Charger. The impact caused Rodriguez Medina's car to veer off the roadway and roll over. Davis suffered minor injuries. The crash remains under investigation. That's a full reading of FHP. Lehigh Acres man drove through stop sign, suffered critical injuries. Alva man charged with abuse of horse. The story by Michael Braun of the Fort Myers News Press, a USA Today network. An Alva man is facing charges after a horse in his care was found to be malnourished and suffering from numerous cuts and a fly-infested wound. Jose Antonio Gomez Ascanio, age 71, was arrested and charged with tormenting an animal and permitting livestock to run at large or stray. The East Lee County Sheriff's Office went to Edwards Drive, just west of Joel Boulevard in Alva, on July 3rd to check a report of possible animal cruelty and neglect for a malnourished horse on a nearby property. A sheriff's deputy found a female paint horse showing signs of malnutrition. An examination of the horse, it was white and brown, based on a visual observation, and a manual examination of the animal's fat cover over the 6 major points of the horse found it to be in distress. The sheriff's office contacted the animal's previous owners to gauge condition. Horses from 1 to 9, 1 being gaunt and skeletal and 9 reflecting obesity, scored the horse at 2.5. The horse had sores and cuts on the back of its rear legs and fresh wounds on the left side of its head, was bleeding and infested with flies. Additionally, the horse's hooves were overgrown and cracking, and a scar was apparent on the horse's neck. The horse is currently at the sheriff's office impound yard receiving veterinary care. Gomez Ascanio was released from Lee County Jail on $2,250 bond and will be arraigned July 30th. That's the full reading of the story, Alva man charged with abuse of horse. Thanks for listening to Radio Reading, where we turn sight into sound. I'm Charles Hidalgo. We are a volunteer program brought to you by WGCU Radio. That's 90.1 FM, Fort Myers, 91.7 Naples and Marco Island. We are now available worldwide 24 hours per day on the WGCU app for cell phones and other mobile devices. Download the WGCU app for free today on Google Play or the Apple iStore. We'll be back in the next hour. We're going to be covering obituary, sports, business, editorials, and features, including Dear Abby. You won't want to miss it. Stay tuned. We're going to take a short break and be back in a minute or two. And welcome back to Radio Reading Service, where we turn sight into sound. Good morning and good evening. We are reading from the Fort Myers News Press and the Naples Daily News and the USA Today newspapers today. The following program may contain content that some listeners may find objectionable. You're listening to WGCU WMKO. We are a link to your community and a bridge to the outside world. I'm Charles Hidalgo. Headline: Manfred insists league isn't juicing baseballs. The story by Gabe Lacasse of the USA Today, generates out of Cleveland, Ohio. Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred and Players Association Executive Director Tony Clark aren't in agreement on much, and even disagree with some topics on which they're in lockstep. One area they do share a sentiment: the baseball is not performing as it typically does. The question: where to go from here? Tuesday night, the Astros ace Justin Verlander started for the American League in the 91st All-Star Game at Progressive Field, a day after he once again lamented the rabbit ball that's helping drive a record home run rate, while insisting MLB had a hidden hand in juicing it up. Earlier Tuesday, in consecutive news briefings with the Baseball Writers Association of America, Clark and Manfred addressed the ball issue, with Manfred denying any intentional manipulation. He did note this: the league is considering changes to the ball's specifications. Quote, "Topic under discussion," Manfred said, "can go no further." He was more effusive in rebuffing Verlander. He said, "If we make a decision to change the baseball," he insisted, "you're going to know about it before we make changes." The issues take on greater scrutiny due to MLB's $395 million purchase of a ball manufacturer, Rawlings, in 2018. A transaction, Manfred says, was driven by ensuring the viability of company producing an essential product while maintaining control over its development. That could be interpreted, as Verlander did, as a move to juice or deaden the ball at MLB's whim. This season, 2.74 home runs are hit in the average Major League game, a rate that will demolish the record of 2.52 set in 2017. And so, to pitchers, the jacked-up outcome feels likelier. Clark just knows results are amiss. "I believe the ball has changed," he says, "and I don't know why. The game has changed. The ball is different. Nobody has presented the why yet. The difference is yielding different results on the field. The question becomes, what are we going to do about it?" A 2018 study commissioned by MLB identified a decrease in drag coefficient as a key reason why balls were flying farther. Home run rates normalized a bit in 2018, but shot up again this year as 3 players arrive at the All-Star break with at least 30 home runs, and previously slap-happy middle infielders have topped the 20 mark. So what now? The veiled and direct shots among pitchers and management will likely continue, but resolving trust issues would probably go a long way toward arriving at a conclusion. The easy answer is tightening the manufacturing specifications of the ball to allow for less variance and ostensibly less hop. Clark seems more willing to explore creative avenues to return sanity to the long ball. "We get the data, we get the analytics, we get the scientists to have gone through it," he said. "The next step we have gotten to is to tighter specifics." There was magically a humidor in Colorado in 2002. That's doctoring the ball, too. I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't concerned, both as a player and as someone who watches the game played on the field. Locally, FGCU women finalized St. Francis game at FSW. ASUN men's schedule released. From Staff Reports, Naples Daily News, USA Today Network, Florida. The FGCU women's basketball team has finalized its contest against St. Francis, PA, which will be hosted at Florida Southwestern College's Suncoast Credit Union Arena on November 22nd at 2 p.m. The switch to FSW was necessary because Alico Arena will be hosting the ASUN volleyball tournament from November 21st through the 23rd. "We played a very competitive game with St. Francis last year," FGCU coach Carl Smesko said in a release. "Fortunately, we're able to pull away late, and it's good to have them on the schedule again this year, as it will provide a quality test for our team." The ASUN also released its men's basketball conference schedule. Last year, the Eagles women traveled to Loretto, Pennsylvania in early December and used a game-high 26 points from Nazrin Ulel in a late 16-2 run in an 83-69 win. The date for FGCU's game with Duke still has not been finalized. Jumping back to baseball news, the headline reads, 5 Unlikely Paths to All-Star Game. Story by Gabe Lacasse. of the USA Today. Cleveland. Baseball is reveling in an era of instant stardom where Major League-ready talents seemingly roll off an assembly line and right into the All-Star game. Be it Cody Bellinger or Pete Alonso, Ronald Acuna Jr. or Alex Bregman, this 91st All-Star game at Progressive Field is a salute to the game's quick-twitch developmental arc. So it's easy to forget about the late bloomers, and foolish of us to do so. As the brightest stars grace baseball's second biggest stage, a look at a quintet far removed from their years on top prospects lists, if they were ever there at all. McCann. You do you. Baseball can be a game of osmosis, where moderate talents surrounded by greatness can absorb the qualities of superstars and apply it to their own careers. And sometimes, the urge to keep up with the superstars can consume a player before he finds his own niche. James McCann knows the feeling. He debuted on a 2014 Detroit Tigers team that was an intersection of future Hall of Famers like Miguel Cabrera's, stars about to take off like J.D. Martinez, and a gaggle of veterans for which a trip to an All-Star game was relatively expected. Released by the Tigers with 4 years of service time, it was a natural time for a reset, and the answer was far simpler than you could imagine. I figured out, he says, who James McCann was. Don't try to be something I'm not. Who was I as a hitter? That answer, not a superstar, but also not the .240 hitter and 76 OPS plus man he was in Detroit. Landing with the Chicago White Sox, which he calls a great change for me, McCann has flourished with a .316, .371, .502 slash line. His 9 home runs don't project to a huge season, but are already a career high for him. La Stella, playing through pain. As the AL All-Stars met the media Monday, Tommy La Stella quite literally had nowhere to go, leaned against the back of his podium where a set of crutches, a tangible evidence of a nightmare 48 hours that turned his first All-Star appearance into a solemn journey rather than a joyous celebration. The Los Angeles Angels second baseman is still processing the July 1st death of teammate Tyler Skaggs, who passed away at the team's hotel near Dallas. One night later, the Angels played on, and La Stella broke his leg. A player already sporting career highs with 16 home runs and a .300 average would be of no physical use at Progressive Field. And like all his Angels teammates, would be nursing a broken heart in addition to his fractured right tibia. They urged him to go. It's been a confusing week for all of us, says La Stella. It still doesn't feel real, and we're not going to stop missing Tyler. Gallo, I have to earn them. Baseball's constant evolution means many players often get stuck in eras that are not suited for their skills. Joey Gallo is not one of those players. The Texas Rangers slugger has perhaps epitomized this period of 3 true outcomes: strikeout, walk, home run, in which balls in play are few and huge strikeout totals ignored. Thank God, he says, that helped me a ton playing in this era. I'm viewed as a different player, and I'm grateful that I'm playing in this era. I think if I played 15, 20 years ago, I wouldn't be viewed as an all-star. Yet his 41 and 40 home runs hit in the past 2 seasons were paired with batting averages of .209 and .206. Never mind the 196 and 207 strikeouts. Nobody cares. Valued? Gallo certainly was. An all-star? Not until this year, when the traditionalist view might finally consider him a complete player, as he's pushed his average to a very respectable .275, and his OPS plus to a career best .166. It's not a coincidence. Gallo credits new Rangers hitting coach Luis Ortiz with helping him find an approach at the plate, one that goes just a tick beyond whale and bail. Being a power hitter, they're not just going to lay them in there for me. I have to earn them, he says. McNeil, kid rakes. The players kept coming, and so did the phone calls. As the New York Mets added Robinson Cano and Judd Lowry, Jeff McNeil kept fielding phone calls from the Mets front office, assuring him that after batting .329, albeit in just 225 at-bats sample, the former 12th round pick was very much in their 2019 plans. They said, "We'll find you a spot." It's generally wise to make room for the National League's best hitter, and right now, that's Jay McNeil. He's hitting .351 with bouncing around the diamond from left to right field and second and third base. His job, above all, being in a lineup stable in a year in which Cano has disappointed and Lowry has yet to play due to knee and hamstring ailments. McNeil said he didn't need much reassuring this winter because he'd be close to an everyday player. Then again, he's such a hard worker. He went through the gauntlet a little bit by being hurt early in the minor league career, but he's a grinder, says Alonso, 24. The kid rakes. It's simple as that. And the fifth unlikely path to the All-Star game, Vogelbach. Some people get stuck. He wears a different shade of blue now. But for Dan Vogelbach, 6 years of knocking around the minors with the Chicago Cubs created bonds that are tough to break. He roomed with Albert Almora Jr. He's still in almost constant contact with the slugger and now leadoff hitter Kyle Schwarber, who he says will text and tell me when he's going to swing at the first pitch and when he's not. He did not make the majors until the Cubs dealt him to Seattle in July 2016, meaning no championship ring. But in return, the Cubs received Mike Montgomery, the man on the mound, when they wrapped up Game 7 of the World Series. And Vogel is forever grateful for the deal, as he knew he'd never displace first baseman Anthony Rizzo. At 26, he is a big league regular, which would have been good enough for this season. And that's the complete reading of the story, 5 Unlikely Paths to All-Star Game. Here's another baseball story. Guerrero was the real winner of Home Run Derby. The story by Jesse Yomtov of the USA Today, Cleveland. Decades from now, you'll be hard-pressed to recall that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was actually not the official winner of the 2019 Home Run Derby. Monday night's showcase at Progressive Field will go down as the night the 20-year-old Toronto Blue Jays phenom took the baseball world by storm. His official coming-out party. That's, of course, no slight against champion Pete Alonso, who outlasted Guerrero in the final and is on his own path to stardom. Guerrero, one of the most hyped prospects in recent history, hit 91 home runs in the Derby, the new mark for homers in one event. He had the longest homer of the night, a 488-foot blast that just about touched the scoreboard in left field. In the first round, Guerrero's 29 long balls set the record for the most in a single round. He would proceed to tie that record all of 30 minutes later in the semifinal. That round was a show of its own. Los Angeles Dodgers outfielder Jock Pederson matched Guerrero's 29. In a minute-long tiebreaker, they both hit 8. In a 3-swing double tiebreaker, they each hit 2. In the triple tiebreaker, Guerrero finally prevailed, going long in his first 2 swings. Pederson only managed just 1. I was kind of scared he was going to beat me, Guerrero said through an interpreter. The crowd in Cleveland got behind Guerrero in full force, erupting every time the bat met his ball. It was quickly evident that if hometown hero Carlos Santana wasn't going to win, they'd be rooting for the kid. But that round not only captivated the fans, but it also had other All-Stars watching in awe from the sidelines. That was elite hitting. That was some of the best rounds of BP I've ever seen, or batting practice. Better than Josh Hamilton's round in 2008, Alonso said of the Guerrero-Pederson duel. I don't know if we'll ever see that again, said Pittsburgh Pirates first baseman Josh Bell, who was knocked out of the first round. Quote, "I think the whole Vlad-Jacques showdown took the cake for me tonight. You wanted more tiebreakers." Guerrero has long been touted as an almost superhuman hitter, but he has endured growing pains during his first season in the majors, just like any young player would. He's batting .249 with a .741 OPS in 225 at-bats for the Blue Jays, only a slight drop from the .381 average he posted in the minors in 2018. And that brought us to this home run derby. Some were critical of the league's decision to include Guerrero, considering he has just 8 home runs on the season. It turns out the powers that be knew exactly what they were doing. Playing in Toronto, Guerrero hadn't quite gotten as much attention as we anticipated since his big league debut in April. But that all changed Monday. Under the bright lights on national television, the Derby was a stage meant for a transcendent talent like Guerrero, and boy did he deliver. I gave it all I had, Guerrero said. Here's a story from the realm of women's soccer. World Cup champs get home for the parade, reads the headline. The story from the Associated Press generates out of New York, and it's in the news press today. Megan Rapinoe stepped off the plane with champagne in hand, a fizzy souvenir, and from most memories, a memorable trip overseas. Thank you, France, for the hospitality, the U.S. soccer star said, but wow, we are very excited to be back in America. The U.S. women's national team arrived in New York on Monday, a day after beating the Netherlands 2-0 and capturing a record 4th Women's World Cup title. Players and staff touched down at about 4:30 p.m. at Newark Liberty International Airport, where they were met with cheers and a banner saying, "Congratulations, Team USA." More fans waited at their hotel in Manhattan, and the players were sure to be feted around the city all week, capped with a ticker tape parade Wednesday. Quote, "I think everyone's feeling just incredible right now," said Alex Morgan, who swapped out her imaginary teacup for a golden bottle of bubbly on the flight. Rapinoe converted a penalty kick in the second half, and Rose Lavelle added a goal in the championship game, kicking off a party that carried over to the tarmac in Newark. Players gathered for a toast and posed for pictures as they sang, "We are the champions, we are the champions." We kind of went through stages, Morgan said. Initially, everyone was excited, and then a little hungover, and then we slept a little bit, and then we got up and started celebrating a little more. The team got shout-outs across social media, including from Presidential Donald Trump and President Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, 2-time World Cup winner Mia Hamm, Stephen Curry, Snoop Dogg, Ellen DeGeneres, and many, many more. Dozens of politicians offered congratulations, and Congress top Democrats have invited the team to Washington. That was all news to players when they landed, since their flight back to the U.S. did not have Wi-Fi. Crazily enough, in this day and age, in 2019, we've been in the dark for 9 straight hours, Rapinoe said. We're sort of catching up on everything. Wednesday will mark the New York City's first ticker tape parade since the women's team won the 2015 World Cup. The procession will move up the Canyon of Heroes, a section of Broadway between Battery and City Hall in Manhattan. Large crowds are expected. Mayor Bill de Blasio, a Democrat, will then give the players a symbolic key to the city. A ticket to the City Hall ceremony have now been issued. Long Island's Crystal Dunn was a late cut from the 15 women's squad, and she's super excited to parade through her own city. "I am such a proud New Yorker," she said. "It's in my blood. It's everywhere I go. It's such a special place." Obviously, this to be our first stop back here when we get to the United States, it's just incredible. The team will go to a 5-game victory tour beginning August 3rd when it faces Ireland at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California. The other matches are scheduled for August 29th, September 3rd, October 3rd, October 6th, with opponents and venues still yet to be determined. Good morning, and thank you for listening to Radio Reading, where we turn sight into sound. I'm Charles Hidalgo, and here's a news story from the sports section of the news press on golf, senior golf at that. Senior golfers at Bentley Village have aces up the sleeve. By story written by Andrew Sodergren of the Naples Daily News, a USA Today network, Florida. Alice Taylor took up golf early 20 years ago when she and her late husband Jess moved to Vi at Bentley Village in North Naples. As an avid tennis player, Taylor decided to give a sport a new shot. The first time I went out and played with my tennis swing and hit about 5 cars with the golf ball, she said with a smile. I told Jess if I got a hole-in-one, I should get $100. And then gradually, every time after that, another $100. The first time was okay. The second time was sort of okay. And then that was the end of that. Taylor, age 88, now has 18 aces to her credit. Officially the top active female at the retirement community. Peg Wilmot, also 88, is nipping at Taylor's heels with 17 holes in one, although that fact is questionable in itself. The modest Wilmot insists she has 17, while Taylor believes that number to be 19, which would give Wilmot the lead. No, I have 17, Wilmot said, as a group of community's top aces got together to play Friday. Taylor has the lead, not me. Bentley Village Golf Club is private. 18-hole par 3 course designed by golf course architect Gordon G. Lewis. The longest holes off the men's tees are 14 and 15, tied at 155 yards. The longest off the women's tee is number 14 at 120 yards. The shortest hole is the first, which is 60 yards for the men and 38 yards for the women. And that is a partial reading of the sports story. Senior golfers at Bentley Village have aces up the sleeve. Taking a look at some business news from the USA Today's Money section. Attention Walmart managers. Virtual reality helps with hires. A story by Rebecca Tuchscherer of the USA Today. Walmart, the country's largest private employer, is using virtual reality headsets to test which employees have the aptitude for middle management positions. The VR headsets place Walmart associates in real-life situations, such as calming an angry shopper or giving new employees a store tour. That test of knowledge of store departments, decision-making, leadership capacities, and soft skills to place employees in the best-fitting jobs, said Drew Holler, Walmart's Senior Vice President for Associate Experience. The situation then can be virtually replicated and standardized for hundreds of employees, eliminating bias while placing employees in positions that best fit their skill sets. What we measure is how they engage with us, Holler said. There's no right or wrong, but it gives us an understanding of their level of maturity when it comes to leadership, as well as how they view customer service. STRI VR, a company based in Menlo Park, California, designed Walmart's virtual reality training using $250 Oculus Go VR headsets. Oculus is a virtual reality company owned by social media giant Facebook. Walmart and STRI VR's partnership started 3 years ago in 2017. The VR headsets first rolled off in 30 Walmart academies where associates were trained to handle situations from the everyday, such as managing the produce section, to the rare, such as Black Friday madness. Since then, the Oculus Go VR headsets have expanded to all Walmart storefronts, and 10,000 of the 1.2 million employees have undergone the skills management assessments as of February, according to Holler. How it works. David Arias, age 32, a 12-year employee of the Walmart in Economy, Pennsylvania, earned a promotion and a 10% pay raise a month ago after being tested with the VR technology. He said one of the VR scenarios required him to act as manager and assist a store employee and customer searching the aisles for mascara. Based on his handling of the situation, his hiring manager and the VR technology determined he had equal strengths for teaching and leadership. Our environment truly is 360 degrees, so a move to VR is a superb choice in keeping up with the times, Arias said. You get a better feel for what it's actually like to be in those shoes. Holler said the VR assessment is the only one of the data points used during the hiring process. The decision is still made by the hiring director. A virtual workplace. However, Walmart isn't the only company to dive into the virtual, augmented, or mixed realities. Johnson & Johnson launched a surgical training program for doctors and nurses using VR headsets. Farmers Insurance trains its agents how to appraise damages using the technology, and Ford designers sketch car models in real time with coworkers living across the country. Quote, "As people, we think naturally in 3D," said Maria Fernandez Guajardo, the head of the enterprise for Oculus VR and AR. "Because we've been reduced to a 2D surface, we've constrained the way we think." Virgin Galactic says it plans to go public. Richard Branson's space tourism venture Virgin Galactic is planning to go public, creating the first listed human spaceflight firm. Virgin Galactic said Tuesday it is merging with social capital Hedasofia, whose CEO, Chamath Palihapitiya, will become chairman of the combined entity. The value of the merger was put at $1.5 billion. The company aims to complete the merger this year before listing on the New York Stock Exchange. Stearns Holdings files for Chapter 11. Mortgage lender Stearns Holdings filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection Tuesday, blaming its woes in part on increased interest rates. The company, which owns Stearns Lending, had piled up an unsustainable amount of debt and began to struggle when the housing market faced higher borrowing costs. The company said it would continue running its business and borrowers must continue to pay their mortgages. Job openings and hirings both decrease in May. Job openings posted by U.S. employers slipped 0.7% in May, while hires tumbled 4.4%, a sign that the job market may be cooling slightly. The Labor Department said Tuesday that employers posted 7.3 million jobs in May. They hired 5.7 million, down from the record 6 million in April. The Dow Jones Industrial Average stood yesterday at 26,783. That's down 22.65 from the day before. DNA testing. Is your privacy under risk? Data breaches raise worries as test kits proliferate. The story by Edward C. Begg of the USA Today Network. DNA testing is all about unlocking secrets, but sometimes surrendering your saliva may also mean surrendering a bit of your privacy, yours or someone else's. Quote, "I think people need to be prepared and warned that they might find out something that could make them very uncomfortable," said Jeff Hettinger, one of the growing number of people who submitted a sample and discovered a sibling he never knew existed. His dad had never told him. DNA testing from the likes of leading services 23andMe and Ancestry, among others, always has boiled down to risk and reward, a fascination and curiosity about one's roots and or predispositions to disease, balanced against trepidations around privacy, security, and for sure, the possibility of an awkward or identity-altering discovery. Yet, rising concerns of data breaches or an overreach by law enforcement have made some people reticent about voluntarily spitting into a tube or taking a swab of the cheek, even as this popular pastime continues to grow. It has also come to... let me move the paper here so I can read it a little better. It has also come to the top DNA testing companies in the industry banding together to put privacy front and center. MIT Technology Review estimates more than 26 million people have taken an in-home ancestry test. The DNA risk to uncovering secrets. But experts counsel at DNA newbies to consider what for some could turn into an unpleasant flip side. Are there secrets in the family? Asked Whitney Duquesne, Director of Cancer Genetics Services at Informed DNA in St. Petersburg, Florida. Who knows of cases where individuals found out they had no biological connection to people they believed were blood relatives. James Hazel, research fellow at Vanderbilt University's Medical Center, raises another issue that may cut both ways. The ability of people to readily identify anonymous sperm donors who wish to remain anonymous when they provided that sample. On the health front, 23andMe asks customers to affirmatively opt in before receiving sensitive reports that may show a genetic predisposition for BRCA variants, which may indicate an increased cancer risk, or late-onset Alzheimer's disease, says Adriana Beach, the company's corporate counsel for privacy. Could someone steal my identity from DNA details? Meanwhile, frequent reports of database ruptures in all areas of tech and businesses are likely to give pause to people who wonder about genealogical data landing in the hands of or identity of thieves and scam artists. Seeking out distant relatives also means you or your data may have to be exposed to some degree so that you, in turn, can be found. A year ago, the MyHeritage testing service acknowledged a breach of email addresses and hashed or scrambled passwords of more than 92 million users that turned up on a private server the previous October. The company's then Chief Information Security Officer Omer Deutsch said that no other sensitive data, including family trees and DNA, was compromised since such data is stored on separate systems. Still, the episode sounded alarm bells. We haven't really seen any reporting surrounding a security breach involving genetic data of customers in the United States with any of these large ancestry or health testing companies, Hazel said. But as the database grows in size, they represent an increasingly valuable target to potential hackers or others who may wish to gain access to that info. Even so, Hazel and others think the greater risk to privacy and security is more likely to come not from genetics data, but from all the other information that can be found on the internet, including social security numbers, passport information, and financial records. If someone wants to work with you on identity theft, there are a lot of easier ways to do it than to try to figure out your great-great-grandparents, agrees David Nicholson, co-founder of the Living DNA testing service in the UK. When police use these DNA databases, privacy advocates have also flagged major concerns around the use of DNA by law enforcement. DNA forensics have helped solve decades-old cold cases, leading notably to the arrest of suspected Golden State Killer in California. Investigators were able to uncover clues via the public database GED Match, which hosts data people voluntarily upload from private testing services as a way to find matches with potential relatives who tested their DNA elsewhere. The worry, though, is that by permitting law enforcement to poke around such DNA databases, a legal shadow may cast over innocent family members, some of whom never even submitted their DNA anywhere, much less gave their blessings to be searched by the police. You decide to contribute your DNA to one of these services, and you have by default included your parents, your siblings, if you have any, your kids, if you have any of your future kids, and future nieces, nephews, and everybody else, says Jen King, Director of Consumer Privacy at Stanford Law School's Center for Internet and Society. Family Tree DNA faced a backlash this year after acknowledging that it cooperated with the FBI on crime solving. The authorities were able to set up profiles on the site hoping to match DNA samples collected from crime scenes. But I didn't sign up for this. Family Tree DNA subsequently changed its privacy policy, allowing users to opt out so that their DNA could not be matched up against such profiles. GED Match also recently changed its policy. It now requires people to specifically state if they'll allow their information to be shared with law enforcement. Prior to that time, we had always warned our users in our terms of service that our site might be used by some for purposes other than genealogy, says co-creator Curtis Rogers, who insists there are many misconceptions about GED Match. Criminal suspects are not identified on our database, Rogers says. Rather, genetic genealogy is only the beginning of the long, complicated process that, if ultimately successful, will lead to a person or persons of interest. Law enforcement still has to do a complete investigation, often including getting a traditional DNA sample before they can name a suspect and make an arrest. Such investigations may involve social media, census data, family trees, newspaper articles, cemetery records, and courthouse records. And that's a look at business news for today from the USA Today's Money section. Let's take a look at some opinion pieces. And here's a view from the news press. It's titled, Where Women's Soccer Can Go From Here. It's by the editorial board, USA Today. One of the most interesting developments from this year's Women's World Cup was what happened after it ended. With America's 2-0 victory in Sunday's final, a lot of men's soccer rushed to get in on the action. Major League Soccer loaded up its afternoon schedule with top drawing teams. In CONCACAF, the Confederation of North, Central American, and Caribbean Association Football scheduled its semi-annual Gold Cup final for Sunday night. Alas, the U.S. men fell to Mexico. This scheduling was a matter of considerable irritation to U.S. star Megan Rapinoe and more than a few fans. Female athletes have worked for years at lower pay than their male counterparts to make the Women's World Cup a huge deal. And even on their big day, men were trying to butt in. This is not an unreasonable sentiment, but might we suggest another one? Run with it. If the U.S. women's team is not the face of soccer in America, it is a big part of it. It has now won the Women's World Cup 4 times. The men are still struggling to reach dark horse contender status. And as fledgling as it might be, the National Women's Soccer League, home to all 23 members of the USA team of women, can make a claim that Major League Soccer cannot. It is as good as any similar league anywhere in the world. The women of this championship team are famously brash. They are also smart, persistent, innovative, and very camera ready. All traits that will go a long way in promoting soccer. Nonetheless, they should also know that there are more allies of the menfolk than rivals. Their two fan bases can support each other and feed off each other to create an American brand of soccer that is growing and vibrant, and where the women's side is at least as important. Think tennis, only bigger. This might seem a bit Pollyannish, given that the women's first priority is simply to get compensated fairly. With determination, however, it will happen. Women's soccer will prosper, in part, by tapping into fans of the men's game, who tend to be younger, more female, and more open to women's sports than fans of, say, football. In some places like Orlando and Portland, Oregon, MLS and NWSL teams already share fan bases and stadiums. In others, NWSL teams plan to tap into the World Cup mojo by moving some games to larger, generally more urban MLS venues. But the main reason that women's game will prosper is through reaching a whole new demographic. The crowds at women's games, be they in the NWSL or one of the dozens or so times the national teams play stateside each year, are wholesome family affairs. Go to one, and you can't help but feel good. You also can't help but imagine the vast number of other families that couldn't be there. The demographic is waiting for a nationwide game that is accessible, familiar to both genders, and family-friendly. Soccer, specifically women's soccer, could be it. And with its growth, the women's and men's games could cross-pollinate. The challenge for women's soccer now is to turn the huge audiences for the World Cup into a more robust domestic league. In that effort, women can benefit from the trailblazing that men have done in bringing soccer to a country that once cared little for it. Once the pay issue is properly resolved, the USA men and women's team, as well as representatives of the two domestic leagues, should consider doing joint promotional efforts. In the meantime, maybe all the men jumping on the Women's World Cup bandwagon should be seen in a different light. After all, imitation is the highest form of flattery. And that is an editorial by the editorial board in today's News Press. Okay, we're rolling right along. Here's a story, it's a cartoon actually, of Mallard Fillmore, who made the drawing. His artist and cartoonist is Bruce Tinsley. And there's just a picture of Mallard Fillmore. He's like a duck with a long beak. And then he's just his head. And then the text reads, "Warning, Jeopardy is actually interesting and may harm your ability to tolerate your regular programming. Viewer discretion is advised." Har, har, hardy, har, har. Okay, let's take a look at some other things that are going. Let's look at some entertainment news that's going on. For all you foodies out there, the News Press has a pull-out section called Taste in today's paper. And I'm going to read to you from that. Okay. Can wine-based cocktails still be called a cocktail? The story by Jean Leboeuf. Question. Why are restaurants allowed to advertise cocktails on their websites and menus when clearly they do not have a full bar license? These offerings should be called mocktails or wine-based cocktails. I feel deceived. Signed, sincerely, Sandy M. And John Leboeuf responds, "Sandy, I share your pain. Nothing ruins Taco Tuesday like ordering a margarita only to have a glass of syrupy wine water delivered. Sadly, there's not much recourse. While the state's Department of Business and Professional Regulation does enforce so-called truth in menu laws, rules that ensure your Gulf snapper is indeed Gulf snapper and not Asian farm tilapia, those regulations don't apply to what can or can't be called a cocktail. Cocktails must contain alcohol, yes, but the strength of that alcohol doesn't matter." And that's a story. Can wine-based cocktail be called a cocktail? A partial reading. Let's take a look at today's horoscopes. Starting with Aries, March 21st through April 19th. Pushing all the right buttons may make the thing go, but life is about more than effectiveness. The wins will happen beyond the bounds of the mechanical. Taurus, April 20th through May 20th. When you're used to having a person's full attention, it's a little jarring to suddenly have to share it. Gemini, May 21st through June 21st. Don't settle for whatever mood befalls the environment. Take charge. Set the emotional temperature. You know how to do this. Sometimes you just forget to command the talent. Cancer, June 22nd through July 22nd. Doing the same thing repeatedly can make you masterful, but it's a process. Dips happen. In the lows, they may seem that the role has lost its luster. Reinvigorate. Seek inspiration. Leo, born July 23rd through August 22nd. Just when you think you've seen it all, you'll be delighted by what falls into your field of vision. This happens more to you than to others because you're paying such close attention. Virgo, born August 23rd through September 22nd. This thing going on in your life right now is really precious, but it's not announcing itself as such. If it were condensed in a movie scene, it would happen in one beautiful breaking moment. Libra, born September 23rd through October 23rd. Though the cosmic backdrop is complicated, so are you, and something fallacious is likely to form out of the unique chemistry of this day. You'll magnetize a new friend. Scorpio, Discomfort is a requirement of growth. When a pursuit is extremely attractive, the discomfort is no less noticeable. Sagittarius, financial debts are the easiest kind to figure out. It's the emotional and karmic tabulations that can seem impossible, like math, to solve. Capricorn, born December 22nd through January 19th. When you love someone, you figure out ways to help support and maybe once in a while dazzle that person. The last effort takes the sort of planning that is favored for you today. Aquarius, January 20th through February 18th. You've an interest that could be retired. Where you decide to go in this direction, a clutter of material possessions would go, too. Paring down will liberate new energy. Pisces, February 19th through March 20th. Even the simplest action is executed through a multi-step process. Instincts kick in first. Next is thought. And if today is your birthday, July 10th, happy birthday. No one works harder or produces more than you. Your work ethic has been a source of pride and luck. This year, it's changing. You'll still deliver consistently. Gemini, Capricorn adore you. Your lucky numbers, 25, 3, 33, 48, and 1. Today is Wednesday, July 10th, the 191st day of 2019. There are 174 days left in the year. Thank you for listening to Radio Reading Service, where we turn sight into sound. I'm Charles Hidalgo. It's been a pleasure reading for you the past 2 hours. You're listening to a volunteer program brought to you by WGCU Radio, 90.1 FM Fort Myers, 91.7 Naples and Marco Island.
Refreshing 52 degrees, man.
I love it. Turtle.
He's not here yet, man.
He's late every morning. Okay. Squirrel.
The forest has been preparing just for you. To learn more about cool things to do in the forest, visit discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
This is the Talking Information Center, a window to independence in Massachusetts through